All right, so we're going to read the first text for your argumentative essay. This is text one. It's called Adolescent Sleep Patterns. You want to listen and read along with me and look for claims that support your argument. Text one, Adolescent Sleep Patterns. A Brown University sleep researcher has some advice for people who run high schools. Don't start classes so early in the morning. It may not be that students who have nodded off at their desks are lazy, and it may not be that their parents have failed to enforce bedtime. Instead, it may be that biologically, these sleepyhead students simply can't handle the early hour. These kids may be being asked to function at the wrong time for their bodies, says Mary A. Karskadon, a professor of psychiatry and human behavior at Brown School of Medicine. Karskadon, who is considered the preeminent researcher looking at behavioral, psychological, and other aspects of adolescent sleep, is trying to understand more about the effects of early school schedules on teenagers. And at a more basic level, she and her colleagues are trying to learn more about how the biological changes of puberty affect sleep needs and patterns. Karskadon, who is also the director of chronobiology and the sleep research laboratory at E.P. Bradley Hospital here, says her work suggests that teenagers may need more sleep than they did before puberty, not less as commonly thought. Sleep patterns during adolescence, as any parent of a teenager can testify, most adolescents prefer to stay up later at night and sleep later in the morning. But it's not just a matter of choice. Their bodies are going through what researchers call a delayed phase preference. All of this makes the transition from middle school to high school, which may start 1 hour earlier in the morning, all the more troublesome, Karskadon says. With their increased need for sleep and their internal clocks set on sleep late, rise late mode, adolescents are up against a double whammy when it comes to trying to be up by 5 or 6 a.m. for a 7:30 a.m. first bell. A nap, be it on a desktop or wherever, may be their body's way of saying, I need a timeout. Let's scroll down. To hear Karskadon and her colleagues talk about it, sleep seems to be the Rodney Dangerfield of human biology. It doesn't get any respect. They say the importance of sleep is too often overlooked. That is odd, they think, for an activity that consumes 1/3 of our lives. There's no concept that sleep plays an important role, Karskadon says. It's the last thing people think about. Indeed, sleep isn't even mentioned in the Carnegie Corporation's otherwise comprehensive book on adolescent development. At the Threshold, Developing Adolescent. People need to think of sleep as one of the fundamental foundations for good health, Karskadon argues. It helps to set the clock, helps to give synchrony to the day. Amy R. Wolfson, an assistant professor of psychology at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, has been working with Karskadon on the study of students making the transition from ninth to 10th grade. Early results from the small group of 15 students studied last year show that teenagers were getting significantly less sleep in 10th grade than they did the year before. As ninth graders in junior high, the students' day began at 8:25 a.m. As 10th graders starting high school, they had to be at school at 7:20. According to the study, which has continued with another group this year, these high school students weren't staying up later. In fact, they were going to sleep at about the same time as before. But sleep deficit is caused by having to get up earlier, puts them at a significant risk of school time sleepiness. And that means not only are students missing out on classroom lessons, but they may be at risk of nodding off behind the wheel of a car. During the study, students who were keeping their regular weekday schedules were given nap tests to test for sleep latency. They were asked several times during the day to close their eyes and try to fall asleep. The researchers gave them about 15 or 20 minutes to fall asleep and timed the students to see how long it would take them to do so. It turns out, Wolfson says, it didn't take that long. On average, it took ninth graders just 9.5 minutes to fall asleep. When they began 10th grade, they were snoozing in an average of 8.4 minutes. The sleepiest ninth graders took 5.1 minutes to fall asleep, while the most tired 10th grader was able to nod off in as little as 1.8 minutes. Altogether, 4 of the 10th grade students were able to fall asleep in less than 5 minutes. And in a finding that still impresses the researchers, one of those went right into REM sleep, usually the last stage of sleep. Someone who falls into REM sleep that easily is sleep deprived, Wolfson said. I'm going to scroll down, and here we are. The researchers say younger children tend not to fall asleep when they are given such a chance. But the difference is these students were all well into puberty. The teenagers' bodies, they say, were desperately trying to make up for a sleep deficit. Regardless of their age, people shouldn't be falling asleep so quickly like that during the day, Wolfson said. These kids are likely to be the ones falling asleep in class. Natalie Burrows was one of the students who participated in last year's transition study. Natalie, who started the 11th grade at East Providence High School this fall, knows how hard it was to go from her 9th grade schedule to her 10th grade schedule. She has always been a night person, even as a young child. In junior high, she couldn't go to sleep before 1 or 2 a.m. Then the high school change came. In junior high, she had to be up by 8 a.m. In senior high, that moved up to 7:15 a.m. The fact that I stayed up late had more of an effect because I had to get up earlier. The first hours of school, I'd be dead, she recalls. Going toward lunchtime, I was fine. It was just that first hour and a half was terrible. Carskadon has made researching adolescent sleep the centerpiece of her 25-year career. But a turning point of sorts came for her and her team when they analyzed the results of a study of sixth grade students and their sleeping and waking patterns and preferences. That's when they uncovered their first real indication that biology, specifically puberty, could explain the delayed phase preference among adolescents. The researchers found that among the sixth graders who were in 11 to 12 years old, puberty had a significant influence on the change of the pattern of sleeping late and rising late. Psychosocial factors such as academic demands and peer group influences had far less to do with that shift than the researchers had expected. The results of this study gave us the first concrete evidence for trying to look at the biological side, says Karskadon, whose research is supported by the National Institute of Mental Health. To understand the changes that biology may have on the body's internal clock, Karskadon and her colleagues observed students in her sleep laboratory at Butler Hospital, a Brown-affiliated psychiatric center. To be able to focus on the changes puberty alone brings to children's sleep, the researchers studied boys and girls who are all about the same age, 11, 12, or 13, but who are at different stages of puberty. So now we're starting on the third page of text one. By having the students follow their own sleep schedule and then a prescribed one, both at home and in the lab, the researchers trying to get children's body clocks operating on what Karskadon calls free run. That way, the students can learn what sleep schedule the young bodies would choose without any outside influence of family, school, friends, or cues given by daylight. To know what time the body thinks it is, the researchers take saliva samples during students' waking hours. An analysis of the saliva reveals the level of a brain hormone called melatonin. Its presence is linked to the regulation of the body's internal sleep clock. As the last group of subjects was waking up in the lab one day, the teenagers seemed oblivious to the hour, noon, or the brilliant sunshine outside. The four students, all boys, were propped up in their beds in four single bedrooms that resembled those in a college dormitory, albeit a windowless one. They were to remain in bed awake for the next 34 hours, but they didn't seem to mind. They played games like Connect 4 and Monopoly and watched videos with college student volunteers. It may have seemed like a weird kind of camp to the students, but the researchers and electronic monitors were constantly on the watch. Video cameras beamed to the boys' images back to the researchers' workstations. The wire leads taped to their faces connected to polygraphs that recorded the activity of their brains, hearts, muscles, and eyes as red ink peaks and valleys. While they were awake, the subjects took tests to check their alertness and ability to perform simple tasks. These tests get at when it is their bodies want them to sleep. Let's say that again. These tests get at when it is their bodies want them to sleep. Okay. It was the fact that the school transition group had performed poorly on these same kinds of tasks that gave Karskadon and Wolfson insight into the effects of an early sleep schedule. It became clear that when the biology of phase delay butts up against a school schedule, the kids suffer. Based on the research Karskadon and her colleagues have done, Maybe administrators should take student sleep into consideration, says John A. Lamel, the director of high school services at the National Association of Secondary School Principals. But he cautions the reality is that sometimes you have to go when buses are available. You have to go when parents are available. Schools always have to set a schedule that gets in the instructional hours prescribed by the state, he says. We don't want to discount optimum learning conditions or optimum learning times, Lamel says, but it's a challenge to find the proper balance. That's by Millicent Lawton. That was text what?